Hello everybody and welcome. In this video we are going to be learning about the Pose Morph system inside Cinema 4D and not Octane Render. Nope, I normally say that, but we are not actually going to be learning about Octane in this video at all. Strictly Cinema 4D and the Pose Morph system. Particularly not just the Pose Morph system in general, but a very focused look on a topic that I don't think is covered enough or very much at all, which is the correctional PSD, which actually stands for Pose Space Deformation system inside of Cinema 4D. Now, this sounds kind of complicated, but it really isn't. Once I give you kind of like the base overview of this, don't feel scared. It's actually pretty straightforward and extremely powerful for any type of character or organic deformation that you'd want to apply. Very, very powerful. It's a great way to automate that process. I know this all sounds really confusing now, but once I actually just set up kind of the basics in the scene here, it's really going to make a lot of sense. We are going to do a little bit of rigging. Again, kind of scary, but don't worry. This is actually really straightforward. It's really not that complex. So let's just go ahead and dive right in and kind of set this up. I will take a moment here as well to kind of say, for anybody who has been a longtime follower, sorry about not uploading very many videos over the last, quite honestly, year or even a little bit longer than that. Things have been super busy and just kind of always tricky to juggle real life, other work, and the YouTube channel. So I appreciate for everybody who stayed following, and I hope that this video is definitely helpful for anybody who's watching this. Longtime followers as well as new followers who might have just stumbled on to my channel. But to begin, let's go ahead and dive right in. We're going to create a simple little object to set up the basic rigging. Again, this is actually going to be really easy. We're just going to create a cylinder here, and I'm going to do N plus B on my keyboard to enable Garrode shading with lines, and we're going to set up a few segments on this. Let's up our height segments to something a little bit more. Let's do 16 by maybe 32 on the rotation, something like that. I want something that's an even number. I think that's even. If I go to my top view, yeah, you'll see this line goes right through. This is important because this is the points that I'm going to be snapping our joints to. Just using middle mouse click to hop in and out through there. But now we got this. We can go ahead and press C on our keyboard after we select our cylinder to make it editable. That's very important for the binding process for the bones. Again, rigging can seem a little scary, but it's really not. All we're going to do is select our cylinder, go up to Character, and click the Joint tool. There it is right there. And now that we've done this, we have our joint tool. Now, you might try clicking and you're like, oh, well, it's not working. Why aren't we creating joints? This might have thrown you off before. Well, that's because you actually need to hold down left control on your keyboard just below the shift key. So left control, while holding that down, left click once. This has now created a joint. Now notice it has created the joint underneath our cylinder. This is because we had our cylinder selected. I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. We still have our joint tool, and without the cylinder selected, if I hold down left control and click, nothing happens. Well, if I click enough, eventually it'll happen. It'll create a new root and a joint there. We're going to undo that. But what we want is we want to create it under the cylinder. Now, eventually we're going to pull this out and kind of mess with it, but this is usually how I like to do it to keep it clean. We have our cylinder selected, holding down with our joint tool here, holding down left control, and we're clicking. It's created a null and put our joint underneath of it. Now what's great with this joint tool is if I hold down left control and click again, it's going to create another joint, but this time a joint a child underneath the parent main joint. We can keep clicking, 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 and we can just keep drawing joints all the way through. And because our joint tool is selected, at any point we can grab any of these little joints and move them individually and kind of dial them in. Very powerful tool. So we're not moving the children with under it, because if we were to select this tool itself, press E and start moving, well, now each child joints getting moved, and it's much harder to kind of control them individually because now it's moving the children underneath of it, and we don't want to do that. So we're just going to go back to Character, Joint tool, and start moving those. Now, I made way too many joints. Let's go ahead and delete this and start over. Here's how I like to set up my joint chain when I'm trying to make it for something like this cylinder here. We're going to middle mouse click, go to the right side view, and we're going to enable snapping. That's going to be right up here. Normally throws me off. So we're going to click that to enable it. Then we're going to click this little model settings here and make sure our snap settings are set up correct. Snap is set to on. That's good. Mode is auto snap. Snap radius is 10. Guide angle 90. That's all fine. And we're just going to leave points on. Points is the only one we're going to use. That is because I want to snap to the points on this cylinder. So let's hold down left control with our joint tool in hand, and we're going to create a joint. We can now let go of left control just using our mouse If we click anywhere and drag, nothing happens until we click on the joint. I'm going to drag it right here. It snaps. We're going to go down to the center right here, hold down left control, click, it snaps. Hold down left control again at the bottom, click, and it snaps. We now have our joints. And if we go to here, nicely snapped to the center. And there we go. We now have our 3 joints created, properly lined up within our cylinder. If we go ahead and select one of these joints right here and press R to go to the rotate tool, you can see the joints are moving, but nothing's happening. Our cylinder isn't actually following the joints. Why is this? This is because we haven't bound it or attached it to the mesh or anything. We've just created joints. Cinema 4D doesn't have any type of connection between these. So how are we going to fix this? This is actually really easy. This isn't complicated at all. What we're going to do is simply a bind command. Now, that sounds complicated, but again, very straightforward. It's actually just one button click. The only thing that can be a little bit of a gotcha that can pop up and cause some issues with that is making sure you have your proper object selected. We want to make sure we have everything selected that we want to work and bind with. For example, we want to have all our bones selected as well as our cylinder. So we want our bones and the mesh that we want to be bound together. So we're going to select our cylinder and our 3 bones. We don't have to worry about the root because he's not part of the rig. He's just a placeholder there. We just want our joints and our cylinder. Then we're going to go to Character, Bind. We're going to select Bind. That is going to go ahead and take our skin. It's going to create a skin deformer, and it's going to also create a weight tag. And this is very interesting. This here, the weight tag and the skin. Now, you might be a little bit wondering at this point, why are we talking about rigging? I want to learn about pose morphs. That's okay. Don't worry. We're going to get to that. This all has a direct connection. Pose morphs and your rigging are very similar and connected in how it works. So it's important we have a base understanding of this here. So we have our skin. This is what deforms the mesh. So if we go ahead and deform one of these bones or something here, we can see we still have snapping on. I'm just going to use the shortcut Shift+S to disable it. We could also just click the little magnet there, but we're just going to do Shift+S to turn it off, and now snapping is removed. This is allowing our cylinder to be deformed by the bones. This skin is what is following these bones, and then the skin is then deforming the cylinder, so the cylinder follows these bones. Now, to prove it, if we can uncheck the skin deformer here, it disables it, and now the bones can move. I'm moving that. We want to select the bones. Now the bones can move, and it is no longer affecting our cylinder. But if I turn it back on, boom, it's going to be re-enabled. Now, what is this little weight tag here? This weight tag takes this bones, creates a map on the object, and then tells the skin deformer what to move and where on this. So as these bones are moved, their position is being translated to this little weight tag, and then this weight tag is telling the skin deformer to move. This all sounds kind of complicated, but what all this really means is that our weight tag is very powerful. Our weight tag is what is telling everything where to go and where to be, as well as remembering where it was. Lots of interesting roundabout words going on here. But what all this means is if we select a little weight tag here, we can click Reset Bind Pose. By clicking this little weight tag here remembers the original position it was put in when we bound it. When we created this cylinder and when we bound these bones, when we went into our character command bind, we have now added this weight tag here and we have bound it. We've bound these bones to follow. This little weight tag remembers that position. So at any time we can click Reset Bind Pose and we will reset the position. So if I ever go through here like, oh my goodness, everything's getting ruined. We're moving it. We're throwing everything around. We don't know where we're at. I can just click our little weight tag, Reset Bind Pose. And this is going to tell all these bones, hey, I remember how you're supposed to be. Go back to your right position. Tell the mesh, follow that position. Everything go back to where you were. This is extremely useful, and this is important because this weight tag remembers this default pose. It remembers what the mesh is supposed to be like. It remembers how flat and how everything was shaped. It remembers how the bones were connected to the mesh. It remembers the position for the bones. It remembers everything about how this is supposed to be. This is a true reset to default for everything. Very, very powerful. Now we can make some modifications to that. We can actually set a bind pose. So I can take these bones, make some modifications. Say I'm going to move this off to the side, and we're going to go back to here. I'm going to click Set Bind Pose. This is going to do something a little different than what you think it would do. And this is going to actually take the bone and have it sticking out to the side, not bound how we originally set it up. Why is that? That's because, again, this remembers that position. It says, okay, set bind pose means take that default mesh, how the mesh should be by default, because it remembers that, and bind it to the bones in whatever position they're in. This is the same thing that happens when we went to character and created bind. This was just an automated process that automatically took this weight tag, took the skin, took these joints, hooked them all together automatically. It created them, hooked them together, and then did set bind pose after those bones were placed. This is not what we want to do now, though, because, well, now our bone's not in the right position. We don't want it to be like that. We want to have them in the original bind pose that we made, but move this object, bend it, and then have it stay locked into that pose, right? That's what we want to do. So let's go ahead and undo with Control Z. And here we go. It's back to how it was. If we click Reset Bind Pose, we're in where it was. And if you're wondering, well, why didn't I just reset Bind Pose before to get this back? Well, if we do Set Pose again, it's broken. If I do Reset Bind Pose, well, this is the bind pose. We just set it. We just rewrote its memory for this to become the new default. So if I create a weird wonky movement, reset bind pose, we're back to that. So the only way to save it now is to do Control Z to undo it. What we want to do, if we undo far enough, there we go. What we want to do, say we want to keep this deformation as the new set bind pose. This is the new memory. To fix this, I want to click once here to bring this little drop down, and I'm going to do Set Deformed Mesh. I'm going to click that. Looks like nothing happened. But if I click Reset Bind Pose, you can see it stays here. So if we wonk this out again, and I click Reset Bind Pose, instantly this becomes our new remembered location. This has now rewrote this weight tag to this being our default pose. This position for the bones, this position for the mesh, everything is now the new memory. But if we ever want to get back at this point, the only way to do it, because we overrode everything with that, is with Control Z. So it's very important to be careful when you're resetting bind pose and make sure you're not setting a bind pose. Be very careful with this. You can spam reset bind pose as much as you want, but make sure you don't accidentally click something else and not notice it, so you can undo that effect. So I'm just going to undo this back to where it was here, and now if we click Reset Bind Pose, we're back to it. Now again, you're probably wondering, why are we talking so much about rigging and weighting and all of this? This is because it's very much connected with how the Pose Morph system works. These run hand in hand. They rely on each other to work properly. So it's very important to understand the basics of how this is working and that how this weight tag operates when it comes to working with our Pose Morph system. So we have the basis now. We have the basic idea of how this is supposed to work. Let's now start creating the Pose Morph system. To do that, we're going to select our cylinder. We're going to right click, go to rigging tags, and then Pose Morph. I'm going to select our Pose Morph. Now, this is already looking pretty complicated, but don't worry. We're actually not going to touch anything in here. All of this was going to be ignored except for points. We're going to simply take the little box next to points and check it on. This means we are creating a Pose Morph that is going to operate on the basis of the points of the object. This is how we deform the mesh of the object, the actual surface. So, now that we've done that, it's much better. If we go back to the basic tag over here, tab, you can see we have all this complicated stuff again. We are never going to have to go back here at all. We don't have to look at this anymore. We've checked points on, we're done. Now we can go to tag, and this is where we can control and edit those points. Now again, a lot of stuff going on here, but we're not going to really worry about much of this stuff. We're going to get to it step by step, and it's really much more simple than it looks. Right now, we're going to make sure we're in edit mode, not animate. That's once we're done. We're going to stay in edit. And we're going to take this default pose 0 and we're going to delete it. We're just going to first understand what is this right here. This is called base pose. What is base pose? And this brings everything together. All this stuff we've been talking about revolves around this little guy right here, base pose. Base pose is referencing this right here, weight tag. Remember when we click reset bind pose? Base pose for our Pose Morph, whoops, got to collect our Pose Morph here, is referencing that. This is the same thing. This is referencing our base pose. When we created this tag, when we set it to point mode, it took this tag here and read its data and has memorized it. It says, okay, our base pose is whatever this reset to bind pose would have brought us to. So if we would have bound a new pose and then created the tag, that base pose would now be whatever the base of this is. So that's very important to remember. This reset to bind pose position is the same as base pose. Whatever that was when you created. When you clicked reset to bind pose, whatever position this went to, when you selected this tag and collect enable points, it automatically created this base pose, and that is what it put in there, whatever this went to. Sorry for getting a little hung up on this, but it's very important to remember that. That's because if we were to do something right now, something we just did that just worked, you might be a little confused if you didn't know how connected those were. Let's go ahead, take our joint, rotate it up, and now we're going to go to here, and we're going to go ahead and do Set Deformed Mesh. We're going to click it. Uh-oh. What's happened? What is going on here? This isn't right. This should stay. This shouldn't break the bone out. Now the bone is separate from the mesh. Why is it doing this? Why is the mesh separate? And the bone is not, it's not following the bone anymore. It's almost as if we did set bind pose, but we did set deformed mesh, so it should fall. We just did that. Why? That's because this memory for base pose is done once and only once. If I go to animate and we take our strength and bring it up or down, this isn't going to make any effect because our base pose, our root core base pose for this pose morph is already been baked in, and this pose morph is taking that original pose and saying, no, this is what you should be for your base. This is not your base. When we bound this pose, that breaks it. It doesn't work. So we can't do any type of set bind pose or set deformed mesh after we've created the pose morph system. This all must be done later. If we go ahead and delete this, it's possible that might bring it back, or no, it's still going to create conflict. So we need to undo that. And we're going to undo until it's fixed. And now if we go to our pose morph, delete it, now we can do set deformed mesh, and now you can see it's working. That's because those are not having conflicts. We're not dealing with that pose morph saying, no, I remember this was our default pose, and then our weight tags over here like, no, we have a new one, and they're just arguing, and it's not working out too well. So we're going to go ahead and undo that again to bring back our pose morph, and we can always do reset bind pose, bring this back to the default, very nice, and we have our base pose. So now that we understand how important connected this base pose is to referencing this weight tag, we now can start adding our own poses. And the reason we've talked about this is because these new poses that we build here are all going to be working in relation with this base pose. So let's talk about what that actually means in a functional system. I'm going to click Add Pose, and we're going to do something simple here. We're just going to do a tangential, I believe a tangential pose morph. Now, there's a lot of stuff in here. A lot of different options, a lot of different controls. It looks complicated, but really the only ones you're going to be using is most likely tangential, or to be honest, correctional PSD. This is the main one you're most of the time going to be using. Once you see how this works, I doubt in many cases you're going to want to use any other option. But to start, we're going to use tangential just to keep it simple. Or to be honest, we might just use relative. I'm going to explain these differences in a bit, but let's start with relative actually. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select our cylinder, and we're going to go to point mode. Now, it doesn't have to be point mode. We could use anything. We could use different controls, different deformer, anything that we want to really do this. We could use sculpting brushes, polygon, line mode, anything like that. Anything we want to manually alter this mesh. So we're just going to select a point, though. We're going to press E, and we're going to pull it out. Now, if we go back to our pose morph, notice we have pose 0, that's the add pose we made, selected. And if we go back to base pose, oh, it disappears. Well, that's interesting. If we go back to this, we select it. There's our change, base pose, and this, back and forth. The reason that the change I made is only showing up in pose 0 is because I had this selected when I made that change. If I deselect pose 0, select this object and make a deformation, this deformation is now part of the root mesh. It's for everything. So if I go back to this pose morph, click pose 0, it's going to disappear, of course, because for this pose that we saved, this should be the only deformation. But if I go back to our base pose, oh, well, then there's nothing. And if I deselect it, oh, there's nothing. And this is the interesting gotcha. If you're making a change, when you have pose morphs enabled, the data, the saved information for that pose morph is still referencing that default. Remember our default reset bind pose? Remember how this memorizes the mesh position, deformations, and joint positions? Well, if we try to make changes to the cylinder, and then go into a pose morph and enable and then hop off and go to those positions, it's never going to be able to go back to what we had because there's nothing to save. This is why the shape of your default mesh should all be set up before you add pose morphs. Now, don't worry if you're like, oh my goodness, I already have my character made, I don't want to have to dump all my pose morphs. There's workarounds for that. We can simply add multiple pose morphs. If we want to be able to have extra deformation or stuff going on, we can say, okay, pose 0 is this. Let's go ahead, click base pose, click add pose again. Now we'll have pose 1. And now we have another pose for here. Now we make that deformation. And now pose 0 has this, and pose 1 has this. And that gives us the ability to have and stack these poses together. Now if we go to animate, we have them all together, all working, and we have pose 0 and pose 1 together, and we can animate their strength. So we can animate from that base of the mesh to our new deform state. And that's how it knows. When we set all these to 0, it knows that this is how the default should look, because that is what we set our bind pose to. That was all done by default, and that is what our base pose is referencing. Whatever our base pose is, which got its data from our little weight tag, that is how these guys know what it should be when it's 0, and they know what they should be when they're animated to 100, because that's what we drug them to be. And this is your most basic, simplistic form of a pose morph. Simple data being pulled in and out based off of where you modified it in its edit phase. So let's go back to edit right now. And we can see that I accidentally drug this strength to 0, so we have them both. Now you'll notice when we go to animate, both of them are 100%. We can see both working together. This is a good thing because, you know, that we want to be able to use more than one pose morph at a time to like create more complex mesh geometry and stuff. But what's interesting is when we're in edit mode, we can only see whichever one we're clicked on. This is because our mode for editing is set to selected. Only sees the pose morph that we're working on. This is good and fine, but as we start adding more pose morphs, sometimes we want to start seeing how they work together. So let's go ahead, click add pose. Now I want to point out you can have any of these objects selected and click add pose. It really doesn't matter. It just is going to change in what position it shows up in. Like for example, if I undo that and I click base pose and I add, I keep stacking them so we count up. That's why I usually like to select base pose and click add, so we keep adding them up and we keep counting in kind of like a more correct order. Or you could have them all unselected and it'll just go down. So it's just organization where you want to stick them. It really doesn't matter too much. But now we have pose 2. So we have 0, 1, and 2. Now, what if I want to be able to see 1 and 0 at the same time as I'm editing 2? Well, I could try to select all of them, but that's not going to do anything. That just kind of bugs it out. What I need to do is select under Edit, In Place. In place means all of these poses are going to be kept in place. It would make more sense if this was viewed as kept in place. They probably could have fit it there, but for simplicity reasons, they just called it in place. But everything is now kept in place. So now, as I go to pose 2, I can go to my point mode, select the cylinder. So this is the kind of tricky thing, too, you have to remember, is you need to have both your cylinder selected, or your mesh, sorry, not your cylinder, but the mesh you're working on, along with the pose morph, as well as the pose that you're editing. So your workflow is going to consist of you select your mesh, select the pose morph tag, select the pose that you want to edit, and then be in the mode that you want to adjust. And because we're set to in place, pose 0 and pose 1 are all set. So now for pose 2, let's see if we can work with this one in tandem. Or say, okay, well this one I want you to kind of go out and do this maybe, right? Something kind of like that. It's really weird. I don't know why I'd want to do that, but there you go. That's our pose, and because we moved it, it's done. It's now in place. Now we can go and select through them and see nothing's changing. They're all at 100%. But if we go back to selected, only that change is happening. So now we can see, oh, well, with it by itself, that's all that's getting moved. And with pose 1, that's what's getting moved. And pose 0. So let's go to animate. They're all going to be engaged 100%, and we can start dragging and adjusting this slider. And you can see now we're working with them in tandem, working together. And we have each individual one working like this. Now you might be wondering, okay, this is kind of cool. This is useful. I could see some cases, maybe for a character or something, like maybe their arms moving or something, like what we have here. We have our little joint tool, right? We can select it, go to rotate. I'm going to deselect that, select this. Got to go to object mode so we can rotate, and we'll start deforming it. And you can see, yeah, I could see that. Maybe it's like create like a muscle or something as the arm's bending, right? Could be useful. But it's kind of a pain having to animate like this. I mean, I guess maybe this was like the elbow bulge or something on an arm. So as I move this, then I could animate this out. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of useful, I guess. We go from that, and maybe this is a muscle. Yeah, I mean, I could see that. But now I have to constantly adjust these sliders. And oh my gosh, this is getting too complicated, too much to keep up with. Why? I don't know. That's just a lot, right? That's where PSDs come in. Posed Space Deformation. The only reason I can remember is I got it on my other monitor here. I'll never remember that. PSD stands for Pose Space Deformation. And how this benefits us and becomes so useful is it allows us to automate this entire process. So we're going to select a little weight tag here, reset bind pose, get everything back. Go to our little tag here, go to edit, and get rid of everything. We're not going to touch any of this anymore. Get rid of it. And we're going to start over with something new, something different. Because what we were doing just here, if I click add pose, again, we're going to add another pose. Instead of using relative, absolute, tangential, or any of these things here, we're going to use correctional PSD now. Now, we are going to talk about the difference of these guys, but we're just starting with the basics here. And then as we understand correctional PSD, then we're going to do a little bit more of a breakdown of how these guys operate. But let's do correctional PSD, because this one is the real useful helper here. We're going to go ahead and click it, and now we got more controls. Oh my goodness. Even more complex stuff going on here, even more confusing. Don't worry, this is actually a lot simpler than it looks. We've already learned, I'm going to hide all these, PSD settings in advanced. Everything above that we've already done. We've got our selected in place. We have disabled. I forgot to mention, if you click disabled, that means none of the changes that we did to Pose Morph would show up at all. So selected and in place is what you'd want. I don't know why you would want to disable it. So as you're clicking through, you just see nothing. It's like it's broken permanently. So I don't know why you'd want to do that. But we have all that in place. We have our PSD set, and we have some new settings here. We have PSD settings. It gives us 4 buttons. Go to pose, select drivers, set pose, and set drivers. Let's talk about what these do. What these do, it gives us the ability to set and save positions that drive our poses. Now, that sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty straightforward. All this means is we now have the ability to do, select a joint. Let's go ahead and make a bend. We're going to do exactly 90 degrees, and it doesn't have to be. In fact, let's go ahead and be messy. We're going to do something like this, something kind of bent off to an angle like this. We're going to do what we normally do for Pose Morphs. We're going to select this, go to pose 0, select our cylinder, so our mesh is selected, Pose Morph tag is selected, the pose is now selected, and we are going to go to our point mode, and we're going to deform it. It's an arm, right? So it's going to bulge. Let's do a little bit of work here. We're just going to keep it simple. Real masterpiece of muscle work there. Yeah, there you go. That's the muscle. The muscle is now bulging. Maybe it looks kind of like this, and we can just keep selecting and modifying these points. But the acute, or I forget the word, like people are good at spotting changes quickly among you, might have noticed that we have a little color change going on down here. What is this? One of our bones has turned blue. Why is this? This is because this bone has been automatically detected as our Pose Morph driver for this change. Now, what does that mean? This bone has automatically been detected that when this bone is in this rotation, because you'll notice something. There's 2 bones here we're looking at. 3 technically, but this one on the end really doesn't count because it's not doing anything. This bone has detected that it is the only one that has been moved or deformed compared to the main one. This one here is the same. It's only this one that has moved. So it has automatically attached it in a weighting, like weighted down with like a weight tag, kind of like what the weighting we have here on this little joint tag here, is it has bound itself to this pose. Now I can tell that and check that by going to our Pose Morph, go to pose 0, and go back to base pose, and you can see it has deselected that weighting. Now you'll notice our base pose, when I select it, because I had it deformed like that, is jumping back to what? It's bind pose. We're seeing what the mesh should be at frame 0. That's why the bone is jutting out there. We're just seeing the mesh in its state. This is not controlling the bones. If we want to control the bones, we got to go reset bind pose there. But we don't want to do that quite yet because we have something we just did underneath pose 0. We're going to click back to there. we have this nice little deformation set. Now, unlike our other options here, after we make our changes, we're not just done. We can't just click away and do whatever we want now. We have one final thing we need to do. We need to click Set Pose. We need to say, hold up, the deformation that I just applied here, the pose that the bones are in right now, this is where you should be at your maximum strength. This is the pose that you should be. Remember the pose when we clicked Reset Bind Pose, that position for the bones and stuff? This is just like that, except in a posed base position. When I click Set Pose, we are now binding that position for this joint all to match up and to all lock up. We're creating essentially a copy kind of Reset Bind Pose, but for just this pose 0. So we're matching this mesh deformation, this mesh position, this bone position. Everything is getting all baked in. So let's go ahead and do that. Set Pose. And once we do that, it's going to automatically deselect everything. And we can see that we still have this little bone kind of locked in. And that is because this bone is that color is because it is a driver. It is what is driving this deformation. What do I mean by that? Well, let's go ahead and see what happens. If we go ahead and select this joint, go to Object Mode to rotate, and start rotating it, let's see what it does. Oh my goodness. It's automatically driving it. If I were to pull this up, it's going to deform, and as I pull away from it, whoops, I selected my mesh, not the right object. If I pull away, it starts to undeform, so be less deformed. And if I pull up, it becomes more deformed and less deformed. Now notice, even when it's straight, it's still a little deformed, and that's because it's not straight. Truly straight should be like pulled back, and then maybe it's like here, and I don't know. How do I get this back to default? Oh, that's right. We got our little tool up here. Reset to bind pose. Click. And once it's in the default pose, it's perfectly clean. And then as we pull this back up to that pose up there, it is now getting deformed. But as you might remember, I didn't actually pose this in a perfect clean rotation. Like if I rotate this up to 90, I mean, it looks deformed, but that's not the position I had it in. It was kind of weird, right? It was an organic position, kind of wonky. If only there was a reset bind pose button that could let us get back to that. Not to worry, believe it or not, there actually is. If we click up here on our Pose Morph tag, select pose 0, we can click Go to Pose. After we set our pose, we can go to that pose. Click Go to Pose. Boom, we are exactly in that position to make sure that we are seeing that deformation as it was applied. This is extremely important because if we were just trying to eyeball this and drag it back and make changes, we would start breaking things. Stuff would start being bound at different positions and it would just start overlap more and more and get more messy. So we always want to make sure that if we want to make changes to this pose now, we got to click Go to Pose, then click on our cylinder, point mode, double check that in our Pose Morph tag we have that pose selected, and now I can make more modifications. Just to make it very apparent that I've made a change, I'm going to pull this one way out like this. So now like maybe this muscle gets extra bulge, something just weird, just something to make it apparent. And now if we go back in here, we've made our changes, everything's selected, right? Pose 0, Pose Morph tag, object selected, changes made, set pose. And we've now overwritten that again. Now we are back. This is now our new pose. So now if I go to our joint tool, we rotate again, we go down, it's off, and it goes up and back on. And because I'm at an off angle, we're not at true 0, we have to kind of rotate back, but why bother fiddling with it there? Just click Reset Bind Pose. Boom, back to exactly where we need to be. Pull this up, it starts to deform automatically. Very, very nice. Where's that default location? Go to here, go to pose. Back to that pose position. Now we have two other buttons here. We have set drivers and select drivers. And what's cool is the left side represents the binding and setting, whereas the two buttons on the right represent going back to what has been set. So both on the left is set pose and set drivers, and the right is go to pose, go to what we have already set as our pose, or select what we have set as our drivers. But what does it mean to be a driver? Well, a driver is what this blue bone is here. This was automatically done where as soon as we started editing this mesh here, as we changed it, this is automatically what has been applied to be viewed as a driver. What is controlling this? It's actually the bone itself that is controlling the deformation. The rotation of this bone as it gets to that position, as it nears that position that we set as its default pose, that is what's deforming it. And as it goes away, and this is very important to remember here, as this bone is going away from that set pose and going towards its default base pose, as it gets closer to this base pose, that is where it is going to become less strong. So if I go up towards our pose that we bound, right, we can go to that pose. That's here. We have this. But if I bend over here, bend around, notice this. We're at the opposite end of what that pose was, right? And now we've twisted it so much it becomes kind of a little snappy. So it can be a little weird, but we're going to bend like this, right? We've gone pretty far away from that direction, right? It was over here, and now we bent over here, but it's staying. Why is that? And that's because this pose is not our bind pose. It is not our base pose. It's not what the base pose should be. Now, currently, if we select base pose, you can see this is what we're looking at with the mesh. It doesn't actually save the bones rotation, so it doesn't really know what's going on there. If you want to get everything reset, we got to do reset bind pose. So we got that there. And now we're back, and as we rotate this back up, you can see nothing's happening. Why is that? Well, that's because in our tag, we're set to selected. We're selecting only the base pose. So I need to set this back to pose 0, or we could just go to in place, and now it doesn't matter what we have selected. So there is a reason why you might want to keep in place on. I keep selected on sometimes because I want to look at them and work on them individually. But that is your basic controls for your driver for the bones. Now what's cool is we don't have to rely on some automatic system that determines the deformation at this point, right? We're going to click go to pose. We can actually set this driver up ourselves. So if I wanted, I could break everything. I'm going to select joint 2 instead, go back into here, and I'm going to click set driver. And now that joint, this one here, has been removed, and it's only this one that is now causing it. And now if I rotate this joint, nothing happens. What's this? Oh my goodness. It's acting all weird and it's not getting turned on or off. And you'll see the first issue popping up that is a bug within Cinema 4D. And as far back as I can remember, but have done testing. So as far as I know, this goes all the way back to R15 or even earlier, whenever the PSD system was implemented. As you'll notice, it is no longer like, don't get me wrong, we did break it by, putting the tag down there. But you'll notice, even though this bone now should be the one that's driving it, as I move it, now it updates. But you'll notice, as I move this, nothing is happening. Why is that? Well, that's because we can't set a bind pose for our bones that are also the same exact pose as our default mesh pose. So if we click reset bind pose, right, this is still on. Well, remember, the difference that causes this to grow or not grow between what we have deformed here from the default mesh simply is the difference between how far has it moved from its default pose. Again, if we take this little guy up here, we bend him, this is the difference. As it goes from here to default straight, is the strength of it increasing in strength or decreasing in strength of that pose, right? Well, what happens if we're already at the default bind pose? If we're already at the default bind pose, our reset bind pose is already in place, and we're telling it, yeah, this default pose for all the bones and joints, yeah, that's max strength. Well, now we're not giving it anything to work through. There is no on or off transition phase. It's just going to always be on. So essentially, we broke it. So what we can do to fix it is we can pick a new pose. We're going to say, I'm going to kind of bring it up here, or we don't have to use that joint, do we, right? We can select this joint. Let's go ahead and take this joint and rotate it to 81 degrees. Let's see what happens here. We're going to go to here. We have the joint selected. We're going to go to Pose Morph, select Pose 0, and click Set Driver. And now, I also believe, now we have the driver set, we also need to click Set Pose. And now that I've done that, in theory, yes, in theory, believe it or not, we are driving it through the rotation of this joint. So if I go to here, reset bind pose, this is 0, and now as we rotate this up, we are now deforming that from this. Now the reason this bone isn't doing anything is because under our weight tag for our joint 2, we can actually paint. This is a little bit beyond the scope of this video, but if we double click this weight tag, we can actually control and paint in what joint is affecting how much of the mesh. So red represents joint 0. just joint, and then joint 1, then joint 2, and that goes down. A great way to see that, I think, is that we double click and I select each individual joint. Yeah, so after I double click this, I can select these joints and we can see the color. So joint here, we can paint what this joint can affect. Then joint 1, we can paint what it affects, and then there's joint 2. What's joint 2 affect? Nothing. Joint 2 has no weight or control over this mesh, so it is purely being used only to drive this pose. So that is why when we go to rotate and we're moving him, he's working with the pose morph, but that's it. There's nothing else he's operating or driving, and that's because he doesn't have any connection to anything else. So we can click go to pose, re-put him back in that exact position, which is this pose here, and you can see that this is already kind of bugging out. It's already having a little bit of trouble. I'm going to do reset bind pose, see if we go to pose. Maybe that'll help a little bit, but again, it's usually best to have it be a part of your mesh. And there's a reason this is breaking, right? The reason this is breaking is because we're doing making the Cinema 4D do a bit of guesswork on what position our morph should be in, because this was supposed to be in this position when this full deformation should be applied, right? Well, because we just bound it to a new position, we're wonking everything out. We're confusing it. We're saying, okay, take that morph, but do it when it's down here, and take what we did while we were editing up here, but now this has been bent back here. Very, very messy. We don't want to do that. So it's very important that your workflow should consist of moving the mesh first, going to the pose morph, modifying the pose morph in that position, then setting your pose, or sorry, if you want to go even more deep, selecting the joint you want to drive it, which in our case is going to be joint 1. Select joint 1, go to the pose morph, select 0, and we could select our mesh as well if we wanted, and then click set driver. So our set driver is actually going to come from selecting this, our little pose morph tag, pose 0, joint 1, going back into here. If you want, you could just click the joint first, then go to the pose morph tag, set the pose, then click set driver. Boom. Now this joint's position is being memorized, and only this joint's position. This is very important. You might just be like, well, just set all the joints to be the drivers. We may not want that. For example, we don't want this joint up here to have his pose memorized. We want only this joint's pose memorized, because we only want when this bend is happening here for this to bend up. This one we want to bend around, do whatever we want. And maybe we want this bottom one to move around, do whatever we want. And we don't want this to be driven by anything else except this one. For example, like the arm one, to make a muscle go up. This is very important to realize that, and this brings back that bug I was talking a little bit that kind of popped up a little bit earlier. Sorry for the roundabout kind of loop on this one, but getting a little bit off topic. But again, we want to only have this bone. So we've done that. We have it. We click set drivers, made it blue. Then we'll finalize everything by setting pose. Memorize the position of these bones. Memorize that this bone is the only one that we set to deform this, because we set our driver, we told it. We're going to do that set pose. And there we go. It's now done. So if we go to pose, we're already in it. So let's go ahead, reset bind pose, select our joint, go to rotate, and we pull it up, and there it is. It's now going up. So let's go here. We can click go to pose, make some modifications to it if we want, and we have it set. And this essentially is your full process. At any time, we can dump this, of course, and we can start over. We can easily go back to our little joint tool, set this back here, and we're at our default with our pose morphs unhindered. So all this stuff that we're doing, it can feel messy, and oh my goodness, our mesh, all this, we always have our go back tos that we can refer to as our weight tag, reset bind pose. We have our little pose morph tag, dump the ones, and the base pose that doesn't let us dump, because that's the one referencing our little reset bind pose there. Very, very handy. So your workflow is going to consist of simply taking your joint, make your deformation. We're going to rotate something here. Going to your pose morph, also making sure to select your mesh. Going to the pose morph, adding a pose, correctional PSD. Going to point mode, making some modifications to this mesh. We're going to make our little muscles. We'll just do up. I'm going to keep this much simpler because, sorry, this video is getting pretty long. We got our little muscle here, and then we go back to here. We're going to confirm. It already has automatically done it, but I like to confirm it. We're going to select our joint, go to here, pose 0, set drivers. Nothing changes because it already selected it by default, but we're going to be exact on that. Sometimes it will bug out and select everything. Sometimes it can be a little weird. So just to keep it extra sure that's only doing that, we got our set drivers, and finally, before we're done, set that pose. Lock in this mesh deformation as well as the joint's position. Set pose, and we are now done. Click go to pose, we go to that, go back to here, reset bind pose, we're back to that. Let's go ahead, rotate it, and we'll go ahead and see it's working. Now this is how it's supposed to work. Notice how as I move this, it follows through as you would expect. It has been deformed, but it has been deformed to follow the mesh. This mesh has been deformed when it went there, and it is now following with the mesh. This is called tangential space deformations. It actually takes the tangents, or basically the surface of the mesh. It gets a little complicated here, but kind of bear with me on this concept here. It's just remember, tangential means it follows with the mesh. The mesh is all one, it's connected, and these things on the mesh called tangents is what it uses to reference the point in space that's going. And so then when this part, all these meshes are moving over, this knows, oh, I'm still connected and attached to these guys. We're going to move over with it. That's a very simple explanation of what's going on, but basically gets kind of like the basic idea across. Now, there's another form of deformation we could do. I'm going to go ahead and delete this pose 0. I'm going to change something. We're going to add another pose, and I'm going to add a relative. Relative and absolute, they're similar. Absolute is where it's actually referencing another mesh. This is a little bit more beyond the scope of this video, but we could actually have a copy of the cylinder and have it reference that. In most cases, I really don't use this too much. I prefer to do my editing directly on the mesh. But if you have multiple copies of this mesh and you always want to be able to go back to that and say, okay, resculpt here and have that sculpt show up on here, you can have that reference, that base mesh. It can get very heavy, particularly for characters. That's why I usually like to run under relative. But I don't even use relative for characters. Normally I'd use correctional PSD. But that, again, it's a little bit beyond the scope of this video, but relative and absolute function the same. It's just one is absolutely referencing a reference, whereas relative is relatively in its own little bubble. So it doesn't reference anything else. But basically what this would look like, now that we're under relative, but now we're off to that ramp. We're going to select our cylinder. We have our pose 0. We set it to relative, and look what it's doing. It is keeping it in its default position, and this is what relative or absolute represent, meaning relatively in this position, or absolutely the reference, but for relative particularly, it is relatively referencing the default base pose, relative to its base pose. So I can make a modification here. I'm going to pull this way out, and now we can go ahead and deselect this, go back to the base pose, go back to pose 0, and you can see that they're going in and out, but it's not following our bones. Why? That's because it can't follow the bones. It has no way of working in tandem because, again, this isn't referencing in tangent space. It can't understand the concept of the rest of these points working. It can only reference its position difference from the original base pose, which again comes from our bind pose that originally was made. So it only ever can remember two things. This is where I am now, and this is my original pose. Nothing in between. It can never follow and offset its position based with that. So what happens if we go to animate? If we go to animate and I go out of edit right now, I'm going to go back to model mode. We now have this being kind of thrown off, and I think it just made a liar out of me. And it did. Relative does actually seem to be functioning. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I got a little confused. This stuff can even throw me off as well. So don't feel bad if you get a little confused with this stuff, because it is definitely complicated. But you might be wondering, why is it working? And this was a little gotcha that I forgot about, which is this little area here called Pose Deformer. So let's talk about what's going on here. This is working. Why though? Because we just talked about, and what I said before was true. I wasn't completely off. This still does not use tangent space. It still can't rely on these meshes to say, okay, my neighbor's moving, so then I'll move with it. It still can't rely on the deformation of the mesh to be able to calculate that, right? It still has no clue. The only thing it can think of is my original position, which was our default reset bind pose. The only thing it can know is this original position and how far it has shot out, right? It doesn't know anything else. So if I go back to base pose 0, this is the default, and this is what we told it to do. So how is it knowing to follow? How's it knowing to do this? And this comes to post deformers. And this word post, it always throws me off. Is this before or after? The only way I can remember is post-apocalyptic. All those movies, they happen after the apocalypse. Well, this is not on. So what is happening here is this is doing the deformation first, which makes sense. It is saying, as far as it's concerned, okay, I do this first. I jut out in the calculation first, like this. And then the deformer, that would be our skin deformer, is deforming the mesh. So the skin is doing the work in making this follow through and move, right? That is what's making this stick and stay in that same position, kind of like it's a weapon or something here. That is what's making that stick out like that. That is what's doing the work. It is not it itself that is doing it, because again, it doesn't have any clue. But if we were to turn post deformers on, now it is aiming the wrong direction. Why is this? This is because, again, it doesn't know what it's supposed to do. As far as its default pose is supposed to be, is like this. Just sticks directly out, goes directly out from the default pose, that is this here. But as we move this, because this is being calculated after this, and it doesn't have any tangential positioning set up, it doesn't know where it needs to go or where it should be. And this leaves it kind of just wonked out and glitched and doesn't function correctly at all. Now, this might seem familiar to you in the same issue we were having with our PSD object. That is the same thing. If you notice, if we switch, let's go ahead and delete this pose 0. And we're going to go back to our PSD object. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this up to say somewhere here, 60 degrees. Go to here, add pose, correctional PSD, select our cylinder, point mode, and do a little muscle bulge again. Something kind of like this and that. And we do, our driver's already set, so we're just going to do set pose. And now we're going to go ahead and rotate it. You'll see it's working. And you'll notice, if we go to our PSD object here, post deformers is turned on. Oh, but it's working. Why is that? That's because it understands the concept of, sorry, I have the cylinder selected. It understands the concept that its neighbors, its tangents are moving, and it follows with the tangents. Now, if we would do something, though, and this is interesting because, again, this is working in a very distinct space. And this is why you might wonder, why would we ever have post deformers on? It breaks everything, right? Post deformers, after deformers, is a good thing to have on when working with PSD. That's because, again, we are baking this down. We're saying it don't just remember the position of the bones, remember the position of the mesh. Remember these tangents. It's actually working with all this data. Very complex to automate it. That's how it's able to tell as it leaves one position into the other. It's actually able to remember to tell those meshes to go into a position for that spot as it gets there, instead of just the position for the whole object. So it's just for this bone and these tangents, where this guy up here, he can do whatever he wants. This mesh up here can do whatever it wants. And it is always going to go to this pose only when this bone is our driver and it is coming into this position. Only then will this mesh go into that position there, which is really, really cool. That's how we can do kind of turns and stuff and deformations like this, and it all follows through. But there's a problem. Here's the bug. If we were to uncheck post deformers, well, now this is getting deformed by the skin deformer. It's happening first, so this isn't after. It's being created first from whatever default pose, which our default pose is currently. It's just like this, which would be straight. It's being created there first and then deforming it up. So now our skin effector, or our skin modifier, is actually bending and warping this, and that's what's creating this kind of weird kind of wonkiness with that calculation there. That is not good, right? That's not what we want. So in this case, for our PSD object, we do want post deformers to be on. We want this to happen after the deformer because we want to actually take in account of this position. We want to account for this. We want to be able to modify for this. And I know this video is getting long, but this is something I want to point out. why we have pose deformers, why this is a benefit to have, and why it's good that our PSD object is actually deforming like this and requires to have pose deformers on. Because, actually, before I railroad myself down that path, sorry about that, guys. Before we talk about that, let's again go over what's broken. Pose deformers off, bad. Broken. Pose deformers on, good. It works for the PSD. But here's what happens. Notice that I'm moving joint 1. That's the one we set as our driver. But if I select any other joint and move, let's see what's happening here. Uh-oh. It's not acting correct, is it? And this is the bug. This means we could have this arm moving up and down, but it's breaking it. And only when we select our joint and we move it, we force it to update. Oh, yeah, that's right. Now we're looking at our tangential neighbors again. I forgot about that. Sorry, let's be working correct again. That is what will finally get it to update. But if we don't, then it starts bugging out. It starts acting in a post deformer disabled function. For whatever reason, post deformers does not update on this PSD object unless we're actually moving it. If we were to select this and animate it, it's going to bug out and it's not going to be working correct. So my fix for this, before we go into the nitty-gritty details of why post deformers is better to have on and easier to work with, and in general superior character workflow than working with relative or any other form without having post deformers on, because you might be like, well, why use post deformers? It worked fine with the other one. Why bother with that? Well, the one benefit you're probably already seeing is, well, we're using correctional PSD. That's a great benefit. I mean, we're automating, so that's a lot less work. We don't have to worry about doing sliders. We can just bend the arm and the muscles will automatically deform. Really cool. But there's another reason too, and this one I think is even more important personally for me, is we can see, again, broken, that's bad. But the other reason that this is really important is if we reset bind pose and we go into here, we delete this and we're just going to add new pose, relative, select our cylinder. What if we wanted to do like what we did just there? Let's go ahead, bend this up, say random position here. Let's go ahead and we're in, okay, relative, we're going to use that. We have post deformers turned off because we can't use them because that'll break it because it can't understand the tangents. We're going to go here, point mode. The same thing that popped up again when we were trying this. It is not memorizing it. So I'm like, it makes it so much more harder as an artist to make that change, because what it should look like is this, and I want to edit here. Well, I can't because, well, it's not in the right place. Now, there is a fix for this. I could say, okay, I want my deformation to happen after the deformers, post deformers. Let's enable. Okay, well, great. Now it's on. Very cool. Let's go ahead and select this. We're going to make our little muscles here, and now we have our muscles, and then we have them set, and now we have them in position. And now let's go ahead and go back to here. Let's go ahead and rotate our joint. Uh-oh, it's still post deformer though. That means it only works when it's in exactly that position, and as soon as it tries to transition from here to there, it's gonna break. Oh, that's right, because this muscle doesn't know where it's supposed to be within that. We can't rely on our tangential neighbors to tell us where to go and how to work, so I guess it's just broken. Well, we could say, well, that's okay. We've already learned that this can work if we unchecked post deformers. Uh-oh, that's right. When we set this up, it was in this position, so it doesn't know how to work without post deformers, because without our object being down here in that default pose, it'll never work. So essentially what we're stuck with is we got to go back to here, reset to bind pose. We can only ever work, we're going to delete this because it's busted, we can only ever work with relative if we're in that bind pose. We can never be in any other pose. Sorry for being a bit of a rant on this. I don't want to spend too much time here, but I want to make it very clear and apparent that this is being able to have a functional PSD pose, correctional PSD pose, is very important to have a healthy, easy to use character creation workflow. And with having this broken currently creates a real bottleneck in not just character development in Cinema 4D, but any type of mesh, organic deformation, proper system of any kind. I mean, this is a very core function of any type of proper workflow, and this is available in Blender, Maya, 3ds Max, and has been around for over 15 years in the 3D industry in general. So having this broken in Cinema 4D right now is definitely not a good thing. So what I would really appreciate, and sorry it's taken me so long to get to this point, it has definitely been a bit of a deep dive here, but what I would appreciate is if anybody can replicate this issue, doing the same thing, like the issue that I'm talking about here too, just to make sure I'm on point, is when we add correctional PSD, we rotate our little joint tool to whatever position, and we go to our little correctional, and you can do this as like a little fall-along test to kind of practice. Go to our little cylinder. It's staying in position. Very good, very good. We're going to make our deformation, set pose, and now let's go ahead and drive it. If you can prove, or not prove, but if you can confirm on your side, just test it and see if it happens to you too, that as you, like, you know, it's going up and down in strength, but as you select another joint that is not blue, it's not our driver, and we move it, if you can confirm on your computer too that this is broken and this is causing trouble for you, then leave a message in the comments saying, yeah, I tested, it's broken for me as well. And then as this video brings up more comments like that, we can use this and send this to Maxon to say, yes, this is something that's impacting a lot of people. I have contacted support. They're super nice, super friendly, great people. But they said that they will get around to fixing this, but it's something that's it might take a little bit of time. It's going to be part of their update cycle, and it really, and the tech support guy I was talking to said the speed at which this gets fixed is going to be heavily dependent on how many people it has impacted and how many people want to have it fixed. It's basically going to be in the back of the line unless it's viewed as more priority. So a great way we can get this to be viewed as a priority fix is having more people messaging and contact them saying, yeah, this is definitely a problem. I have it, and I would like to get this fixed. I think character creation and development is very possible and awesome in Cinema 4D, but issues like this that come is just a broken element to the function is definitely not good for that. And this is exactly like a lot of people might wonder, Maya for character creation versus Cinema 4D. I was in Maya. I've used Maya. I'm not happy with the character creation system in there in the sense that is it way better than Cinema 4D? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. Yes, they have more features and some options and controls, but the main reason that most people use Maya, and sorry, this video has gotten way more deep than it originally was intended to be, is because most people have been in the industry and been using Maya for a long time, and that is why most people end up using it. It's part of their studio. That's what they know how to use. They're comfortable using it. Why switch? Which I can't blame them. Makes sense. Now, if you're using Cinema 4D, does that mean you have to move over? No, maybe this is the program you're comfortable with and you want to use this. But this is just a hard roadblock, one that it's difficult to, and I'm not trying to blame people or get angry or anything. It's just the undeniable truth in this situation where if you're working in a team and you're trying to get stuff done, make a character, the fact that this PSD Pose Space Deformation system, which is available in every 3D package basically, it's a very well-established 3D workflow system. If this is broken and this badly in Cinema 4D, I can't recommend building a character in it. This is what has pushed people to move to Maya. They're like, oh, well, this is a game-breaking bug, or not game-breaking, but definite massive affecting bug. Do I sit in Cinema 4D and hope they fix it, considering this has been broken for potentially 15 years or more? I'm just going to move to Maya. I am not somebody who's really, I get very set in what I'm doing, and I really love Cinema 4D quite a lot. As you could probably tell, all my videos are on. I've been using it for years, almost 11, 12 years at this point now. I would love to see it fixed, because really a lot of the other stuff for the character stuff works great. It works really good. It's just this one here is the most broken bug I've seen. So if we can, if everybody in the comments or anything tries this out, can get it fixed, I mean, this could be a huge breakthrough for Cinema 4D to be able to move forward and get this fixed. And hopefully in the future that we can help them catch any type of bugs that might also pop up for character development. And we can see Cinema 4D become a more well-recognized character development tool going forward in the future. Have this be used by more studios, more people, and not just have it be a Maya exclusive in the industry. We can have more people grow up and have this be their main tool that they're comfortable with and make some beautiful and awesome characters, because it is possible. It's just bugs and stuff like this scares people away, and I don't blame them. Anybody who's using Maya for character development over C4D, I do not blame you one bit. Right now, in its current state, bugs like this are just unacceptable, and in a workflow environment with a high-end team, you can't have stuff like this happening. So I'd love to see Cinema 4D improve on this, grow from this, and become a real strong heavy hitter in that environment, and give more and more reason for people to move away from Maya into here. Maybe they can improve on it. And this isn't me trying to hate on Maya and say, I don't like Maya. It's simply put, just this is more what I'm comfortable with. It has a different UI and workflow method, and I would love to have options available. For people that like the Maya workflow method, you have that. And for the people who like the Cinema 4D workflow method, well, they would have an option too. I'd love to see more competition in that market. Have options for a more variety of artists is basically what I'm saying. Sorry for the rant, though. That went way deeper than it was supposed to, but this is basically your sum up of your Pose Morph system and PSD system. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of wrap everything up here and just kind of do a summary of what we just learned in this video. And I appreciate everybody's patience, and if you've watched all the way through to this point in the tutorial, I appreciate it. I'm glad you watched it, and really do hope you guys find this helpful. I did a lot of research into this Pose Morph system, and I hope this is helpful for everybody. But sum everything up, here we go. This is the finalized summary of what we learned. In this video, we learned how to set up and use a Pose Morph PSD system, the correctional PSD, positional space deformation, position space deformation, that's what it stands for. And we learned how important it is that our Pose Morph works in tandem with our joints as well as our bind pose, because we found that our set pose that we set up for our joints, which apparently I forgot to set that. We should probably do something about that. We forgot to set our pose, and we found that we can set that pose. We can make a adjustment there, go to our deformation, make a deformation, then set that pose, go to that pose, and then, because this is working in a tangential space deformation, right? It's following its neighbors. It can figure out where to go as it's being deformed. Very cool. We can even break this whole thing, just this whole position. We can move it over here, and it can follow. It can get kind of a feeling for where it should be as it's being deformed. Very, very cool. And how it can blend through that. We learned, though, and actually, I'm sorry about this too, guys. I forgot to give you my little fix. My rant here is, what's interesting is we also learned, and are learning now, I guess, actually, that if we select what has not been bound as a joint, with our joint selected, set drivers is no longer a driver, something that is not the driver, this breaks and does not become part of the joint. It does not become it is basically no longer post-deformers, but pre-deformers. So it's viewing itself in like a non-properly bound state. It gets wonked out. The only way to fix it is you have to re-grab this and kind of snap it to update it. The only fix that I found for this, and this is where I'm getting to the actual fix part, is if we go to animate, and we drag this up and down for strength. This is the same thing as dragging this little slider here. It's forcing it to update. It's not moving it. It's just increasing its strength and decreasing it. But it's actually giving a bit of data. So what we're going to do is, and this is a bit of a hack, at frame 0, we're going to set this to 1, and that frame 90, or end of our frame, we're going to set this to just one tiny bit down. So I'm going to go at like 0.999. Yeah, something like that. Very, very small number. You can see that now that we have that, we can make an animation. So if I were to select this joint, say, yeah, I want you to animate from here to down here. And you can see as we're animating from that, that's breaking it. It's like, whoa, I'm getting wonked out. What's going on? I'm broken. But because we've animated it like that, while also animating our little pose here, every frame, it's also forcing that to update, and it's allowing this to stay locked in position through that. Whereas if we were to unanimate that, delete it, unanimate, you can see that it's broken. It's not sticking. So that's the fix. It's just literally putting in keyframes to force it to animate a transition in a value there. The reason you have to do this is this level of broken will come through on your animation, so that's the only fix for it currently, which is definitely not good. We definitely want to get that fixed. So we learned that that's a problem, and we just learned that's the fix. But we also learned how important it is having a PSD, Pose Space Deformation, applied to our joints, how important that is, not just for automation, but for artist-friendly interaction. Because if we reset our pose, that we also learned that resetting this pose here allows us to go back to that default, and going into our little pose morph here under edit, we can click go to pose. We learned that the benefit of this correctional PSD and having a post-deformers workflow after the deformer has bent our mesh is so great, is it allows us to edit and work in its deformed state. Like, for example, adding the bulge to the muscle while the arm is bent in the muscle bulging position. So that is extremely useful there. So that is, like, again, we got a little bulge muscle here. I am really not a sculpting artist. I guess you guys can probably tell. But yeah, that kind of creates that effect there. This video has been extremely long, so thank you so much for watching. I really do hope you guys found this helpful. I feel bad sometimes. I say this is super easy. Don't worry, it seems much more complicated than it is. And I hope I explain it in a simple way, but then I take like an hour and a half to do it. But I hope you guys found this helpful. Sorry it's taken me so long. And I'm going to try and post more videos. I'm hopefully going to get some more tutorials out. But again, thank you guys so much. I will see you all in the next tutorial, and I will see you all then.